Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to the first ever episode of vCluster Fridays. My name is Sayam Pathak, and I'm working as the principal developer advocate at Loft Labs. And this is something new that we are starting at vCluster. Wanted to learn some new stuff, meet with old friends, and try out new things on vCluster. So it should be fun learning and yeah, let's see how things go. And today the first episode will be about Kyverno, which is a CNCF project. And I have been a long time user of Kyverno. It's amazing project. And I also have Kyverno maintainers, community head Courtney and Frank with me, who joined at very last minute, but we made it happen. So here we are, and we'll be learning all about Kyverno and trying out some stuff as well. Welcome, Frank and Courtney. Please introduce yourselves.
So, ladies first.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. My name is Courtney Dickerson. Sam, it is so nice to be here, even if you did call me an old friend. I don't know who you're calling old. It's definitely not me. Great to be here. It's very exciting to be part of your very first vCluster Friday. So thank you so much for having us. For those of you who don't know me, which are probably a lot of you, I help with community at Kyverno, which is made by Nirmata. So I lead community for both of those, Kyverno and Nirmata, and work closely with Frank, who is an amazing maintainer, and I'll let him introduce himself.
Yeah, thanks, Courtney. Yeah, I'm recently joined as a maintainer for the Kyverno project. Before that, I entered the community as the creator of Policy Reporter, which is a sub-project in the Kyverno organization and mainly for visualize the reporting system of Kyverno. Yeah, I also joined Namada, I think last year, August, and I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. So yeah, this is kind of what we'll do is, and this is the first episode, so I'm just trying out different things, and we might change it over the time, improve things over the time. But yeah, it's good. It's Friday, and it's my kind of ending time. It's 8:30 p.m. for me already, so this is my resting time, and after this I'll be off having my dinner and stuff. So yeah, having discussing what's happening in the week is also a cool thing. So try to put in some news here for the what I have seen, and but yeah, I didn't put a whole list, but yeah, we'll gradually increase these. So there was a new change in the executive director for CNCF. Jonathan has joined in, and also Chris, who is the active CTO of CNCF, will also act the CTO for Linux Foundation, which is a big thing. And you can, so this is a public link. I'll also share that so that every person does have the access and they can at least view it. So, oops, sorry about that. I'll share this in the
I think this
chat.
is super exciting news for everyone, right?
Yes.
Always so much going on in the CNCF world. So this is a super exciting update. There's I think there's a lot of anticipation. There's so many things changing. You probably know a lot more about all the different restructuring that's been going on, Siam, the
Yep.
oversight and restructuring of tags and all of those things. So it seems super appropriate that this type of news comes out now as well, as there's so many things going on. But I think it's super exciting times for the entire cloud native community.
Hello. Am I back?
You're back.
Okay. Yeah, my internet dropped. I know it's the first stream, right? So things are about things are bound to go wrong, which is fine. Um, yes, as Courtney mentioned, there are a lot of changes that are happening, which is for good, I believe. So you'll see a lot of good changes happening, and hopefully we'll see cool stuff from the CNCF ecosystem, and also OpenStack. open infra, all that stuff with CNCF, which should be exciting to see everything working with in collaboration. Next thing is the Gemini CLI. Yeah, everyone is excited about it. I don't know. I think it hit to 20,000 stars, 34,000 stars
Oh
in
my
3 days.
gosh.
It's exciting. Like people are getting crazy about the open source CLI, the Gemini CLI. I haven't, yeah, I haven't tried. I have tried it, but I haven't extensively used it. But yes, you can now have the Gemini CLI, the power of Gemini models, 1 million context token. I think you can do 1,000 requests per day that are free of cost, and you can write tools. You can um, call the MCP servers with it. You can have Google search tool, and it can use different models as well. I think Gemini 2.5 Pro is the default one. But yeah, if you happen to try it, do let us know in the comment what you're using it for. If you haven't, then go check it out. It's pretty cool. Like it's going viral as well, so you can check that out.
It's
Uh,
like taking all the complication out of CLIs,
yes.
right? It's almost a CLI GUI, just a user interface that's more fun for technical people.
Yep. And vCluster, which I'll talk more about as well. So every stream, I'll give us a small intro of vCluster, because I don't know if you are only here to learn about Kyverno, but we'll try Kyverno. We'll try Kyverno on vCluster. So it's important that I tell in every stream what vCluster is also. By the way, vCluster just launched vCluster 0.26 with two important features: namespace syncing and hybrid scheduling. So namespace syncing is basically one-on-one mapping with the virtual and the host cluster, and scheduling means now you can have multiple schedulers, and you can use both from the host cluster or which is there inside the virtual cluster, which caters to the GPU intensive, AI intensive workloads, that you can use Sky Scheduler now for your workloads and improve those workflows. And I think K0s is remove yeah the also removes the support for K0s distribution, and yeah, should be fun. So try it out, and I'll let you know about vCluster in just a minute. Another thing was Cloudflare containers, which also got a lot of popularity. Cloudflare containers are available in public beta. These are similar to like serverless containers. You can run your Docker images on the Cloudflare, and I think it. What do they use? There was something Wrangler.json, and you define some stuff, and then you should be able to do Wrangler deploy somewhere. I think I saw that. Yeah, so you can do Wrangler deploy, and you'll be able to deploy those containers, and you don't have to basically manage the Kubernetes itself for your workload. So it's similar to like you have Fargate and you have Cloud Run. I mean, it's they are also meant for different purposes, but yeah, similar serverless kind of concept. Serverless containers, they have their own space, so you can try that out as well. And if you have already tried out, let us know as well. And also, Linux Foundation launched like the A2A project has been donated to Linux Foundation, which is good. There will be more collaboration and more good things around the A2A. All right, so that was the quick what's happening in the week. Now let's move on to what is vCluster. So vCluster is basically virtual clusters. Like it lets you create virtual Kubernetes clusters on your Kubernetes clusters to isolate workloads for your bare metal or on cloud or whatever that is. So you can get rid of. So you can just have very few Kubernetes cluster or a single bare metal Kubernetes cluster, and you can have virtual cluster on top of that, like vCluster on top of that. That will let you create a lot of virtual clusters. So that's the concept. Definitely very useful for isolation, multi-tenancy, for your GPU workloads, bare metal Kubernetes. So these are some of the things. So you can lightweight as namespaces, isolated as separate clusters, and fast to launch containers. Yes, it's an open source project which is there, and there is also the pro version which has a lot more features. So yeah, you can see this animation, shared platform stack and stuff. You can scroll to some of the workshops which are there on the YouTube channel, but we'll see everything in action actually. What how you create that, how it is separate from the separate Kubernetes cluster. Um, All right, coming to Kyverno. So I would open Kyverno.
I was gonna say you can open our repo, and I can talk a little bit about what Kyverno is quickly.
Yes.
So that everybody understands why it's super exciting that we're going to see vCluster and Kyverno working together. So it's very exciting. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Kyverno, Kyverno is a super powerful open source policy engine. Initially, it was designed specifically for Kubernetes, but our policies can be used across non-Kubernetes workloads, which is also very cool. It allows your teams to define and enforce different types of policies and specifically policy as code. So you're using a familiar YAML base for CRD type of format for forming those policies, which is just a lot easier and more straightforward than other formats might be. But also, we've recently incorporated Cell, so you can use common expression language, which is really taking off and growing in popularity in the Kubernetes project. So it was natural for us to then add that to our policy formats. And the whole reason for this is because we wholeheartedly believe that policy as code is super important, and it makes your life better and more secure and more efficient. And so we don't want you to be spending your time learning a new language. We want you to be spending your time creating policies. So you can use Kyverno to validate, mutate, generate all different types of Kubernetes resources and policies, ensures consistency and security and compliance across your clusters. There's a lot of different use cases out there, from very simple use cases that you might use a policy for just naming conventions to much more complex policies for different config maps or roles or mutating resources that you might need to add defaults or inject into your sidecars. So you can use it from anything from very simple to very, very complex use cases. It supports a very, very wide range of issues that you might need to solve. But really what we're here to do is give your team some guardrails, add guardrails into the platform that you're already using, so that it makes everybody's job a lot more clear and easy. They just have basic things to follow, so that they're not context switching so much to figure out how to get their job done the right way. And it's a very cool fit with something like vCluster, because I think today's and probably what we're going to explore a little bit is how Kyverno and vCluster can kind of work together. And you can set up a very lightweight vCluster environment with its full functionality, but then also set up Kyverno policies within that lightweight environment, so you get a real world vision of what would or wouldn't be going on. So I think it'll be a very cool play out. And obviously, for everyone who's moving into a scaled out space, this is very GitOps friendly setup, I think, as well.
Awesome. Well, that was a nice introduction. So basically, policy as code simplified. So we have Kyverno because there is no native solution for managing complex policy within Kubernetes. That's why we kind of use Kyverno. But there is this thing, validating admission policy. So that is just one part, and Kyverno is kind of a big engine where you can have different set of policies and complex policies. And I think it also supports the validating admission policy, which is from the Kubernetes ecosystem. So let's say someone who just learned about Kubernetes and they are well versed with Kubernetes, and now they are moving towards security guardrails, like you said. So what are different projects in this space and how Kyverno stands out? Sorry, I didn't tell you that there'll be tough questions.
Well, then I will pass it off to Frank.
Yeah, so I think there are already a larger list of different engines you can choose. I think one of the most used one besides Kyverno is Opa Gatekeeper, which uses their own language called Rego to write policies. If I recall correctly, we have tools like Kubernetes from the Rancher team, which is built on top of WebAssembly. I think Loft has also an engine called JS Policy, which uses JavaScript. And yeah, Kyverno, as it now also supports any other payloads outside of Kubernetes, still tries to be as Kubernetes native as possible. As Courtney described, we supporting in Kubernetes inbuilt policies like the validation admission policy, and now also the mutating admission policy. Our new introduced policy types are heavily inspired by this new built-in policy types. So they all leverage the cell, and they all have a very similar API, like match constraints, match conditions, validating blocks. So it looks just very familiar to everyone who just started with Kubernetes, and the API policy engine it provides built in. So it's a very small take to move from it to Kyverno and just learn how you can extend this basic functionality with the on top features Kyverno provides. So in our release block for the 1.40 release with the first new policy types, validating and image validating policy, there is a comparison with the built-in validating admission policy. So you will see there are features like auto generation. So when you write the policy for pods, it will automatically create rules for the controller, for the pod controllers, like the deployment, the replica set, the daemon set, the cron jobs and jobs, and so on. You can customize this. So if you don't want it, you can disable it. You can restrict it to deployments only, but you do not have to repeat yourself with 5 different policies just to catch every related resource of your pods. Yeah, as you can see, we have external server, external data access, so you can fetch other resources, like you have some dynamic data you want to fetch from a config map. You want to do API calls to your Kubernetes server to get a list of your existing services, ingresses, or any other resource you have to do some decisions if you want to block or allow a resource. We have, of course, the background scanning. So we do not only check new API requests for creating or updating resource, we also scanning already existing resources. So as soon as you apply a policy with background scanning enabled, you know that all these resources are compliant or not, without recreating or changing them in any way to trigger a policy. And we have our extended reporting system with the policy report, which is getting its own organization called Open Reports in the near future. So we try to build a new community with other engines and consumers to have an open reports CRD and API for basically create a general API for all these different kinds of reporting in the Kubernetes space and have a central reporting system for it.
That is interesting. I'll actually come to reports because I want to learn more about the reports part. But before that, let's actually start understanding the components, how stuff works. So this is the installation. Like the first thing that we do is obviously we need to install Kyverno on a Kubernetes cluster, and I have this base Kubernetes cluster. And if you do kubectl get pods -a, I don't have anything apart from the base Kubernetes, and this just I created before the stream. So there's nothing apart from the core DNS, the connectivity agent, Cilium, and the CSI. The rest all stuff is pretty basic Kubernetes cluster. This is so. Let's see how we can install Kyverno. So I go to the installation, and This is 133, so I don't know if this will work. It'll work on 133, or there's some
Yeah, no, it should work. We using it already in our test scenarios, and we did not have issues with it.
installation methods. Install using Helm. That is fine. Anything. So when I'm doing it for the first time, should I do this or should I do high available install? What is the difference?
Yeah, the difference is most likely that you have multiple replicas. So if one pod crashes for any reason or goes down, then you have a backup and do not disturb your API server. But for testing purposes, I would go with a standard installation.
Okay, let's do that. I think I should be having the repo already, but we can, yeah, it already exists, so it should be fine. So Helm install Kyverno in the Kyverno namespace. So what all it creates, like what all it creates, or what does the architecture looks like? This is the architecture. Or
Yeah,
where I can.
yeah. We nowadays have different components. We have the main component, or one of the most, the main part is basically the admission controller. This is basically the service which intercepts your API requests, server requests, and get the details about the resource you want to create, delete, update, and so on, and applies the existing policies on it. And if it's succeeds all policies, then it will basically allow your resource creation or updates in for validating. If you use mutating policies, which basically means that you modify your resource before it's actually applied in your cluster, then this will also be done in the admission controller. So everything that goes through an admission request, so to say, goes through this service. We also have the cleanup deployment. So the cleanup component is basically a dedicated type. I think the old one is called cleanup policy. The new policy type will be called deleting policy. It's basically a dedicated policy type that allows you to clean up your cluster from no longer needed resources. So you have also the way to add a TTL annotation to your resource and then say, for example, I have a secret with some passwords I need for a few minutes to debug something. I can create a secret, add my TTL to it, and when I'm done, it will automatically clean up. So I don't have to remember to remove it. I can also define cleanup policies like the cluster policies with conditions. So for example, I want to delete all replica sets with 0 pods or replicas. I want to delete ingresses when the related service no longer exists. So all this kind of cleanups can be done with a cleanup policy. The background deployment is responsible for the background scanning feature I mentioned. So if you have policies that run with background scanning enabled, then this controller will periodically scan all existing resources that have any policies attached to it, then applying the policies, and then it will create ephemeral reports. These reports then get picked up by the reports controller or component, and it creates the already mentioned policy reports out of it to have a visible report about your existing workloads and how they are compliant to your policies.
Awesome.
It is possible to disable some components if you're not interested in it. So you can, for example, disable the cleanup deployment if you do not need cleanup policies. Same goes for background scanning and the reports controller.
All right. But by default, it installs CRDs, admission controller reports, cleanup, and background, all of them.
Correct, yeah.
Awesome. So it looks like we are there and should have all the stuff in Kyverno. So admission controller, background controller, cleanup controller, reports. All right. And the CRDs as well. Cool. So let's try out a policy. What do you suggest? The first one, if anyone is trying it out for the first time, the first basic policy they can do. What should
Yeah,
be?
so as mentioned, we currently implementing new policy types.
Hmm.
Most example policies you will find will be in the old format, which means as a cluster policy or a policy CRD. If you're interested in learning them, we have a Kyverno playground, which has a next release, which already supports this new policy types. So you see already a restricted node port policy in the new format. So it really is related or is inspired by the validating admission policy. You see the same format for match constraints. We still have our Kyverno annotations, and the validations list is now written in cell instead of this YAML-based structure we had in our old policy types. So when you click on the burger item on the left top, very left top, yeah, then you have a tutorial section where you find examples for all the new policy types. So we have an example for validating and already for the deleting and generating policies. But we still have our examples for the old policy types as well. So this is I would say, a good starting point, because you do not need a cluster or any playground environment for yourself. You can just use this web UI to try your policies out. And here you can, for example, take a policy and try it.
Awesome. So this particular policy is for the first one. This one. Check
Yes.
deployment labels.
Yeah, it validates for deployments only, and it basically checks if your object or your deployment in this case has a label environment, and if it's a prod.
And what's the action that it will take? Like if it's not there.
If it's not, so when you scroll a bit up, you see this evaluation. So you have background true and admission false. Background means that it will do the background scanning. So it will check if all deployments have this label. When not, it will create a report which says it fails this policy. Admission false means that it does not validate this on admission time. So if you create a new deployment which does not have the label, it will still allow the creation. You can set admission enable to true, then it will basically block a deployment when this label does not exist.
And if I do this false, it will not impact the existing deployments.
Correctly. It will not scan existing resources. So in this case, it will only check on creation or update operations if this label exists.
Okay, let's try this one.
And these types of validating policies, we see, like I constantly am asking end users, you've been using Kyverno for a while, but do you remember the first policy that you installed? And inevitably it's some sort of validating policy, because they're simple to get started with. They set best practices right from the beginning and make things much more visible for everybody involved. But this is a very good example of something that most people who started off with Kyverno 3 or 4 years ago and are now using it for much more complex things started off with, was some sort of validation policy.
All right, so I'll have this. So in the meanwhile, what I'll do as well, like maybe not now. Yeah. So this is the policy validating policy. What all other custom resources we have? Kyverno. So we have cleanup policies. We have general policies, policy exceptions, update request, validating policy. This is the one we're using now, right? Validating policies.
Yes, this is the new one. Policy exception is a way to discover this, yeah, to configure separately when you want to accept certain resources from a policy. So you might have sensitive resources who really need privileged permissions or something, but you have in general a policy that do not allow privileged. So what do? You can update the policy and write some kind of check that this policy, that this resource will not be validated. But as soon you have a new resource which need an exception for this policy, you have to edit your policy over and over again. In some scenarios, this is really, really hard to maintain. And also when you have some kind of multi-tenancy, it's really hard to manage. And policy exceptions are a way to decouple this functionality from the policy. So you have a policy and a resource, and you can add an additional policy exception, which allows a certain resource to fail against the policy without any impact. So the validation will basically skip these resources based on the written policy exception.
Okay. So in the spec section, it's usually the same. Like you have evaluation, match constraints, variables. Like these are general for all the policies, or these are also specific to.
So for the new policy types, I think all of them using match constraints to select the resources. So this is inspired from the validation admission and mutating admission policy. The evaluation mode depends a bit. I think mutating and generating have this as well. For deleting policies, it makes no sense because deletion does not execute on an admission request. It always runs in the background. The validations part is, of course, for validating policies. For deleting policies, you have conditions, but the API is very similar. You have some name, your cell expression, and but the general API is very similar in all types. I think variables are also present in most types.
Okay.
And
audit is for the reporting, like how it goes in the reports.
It's added in the policy reports as properties, so you can extend your policy report with custom details to make it easier to fix an issue or to debug why an issue happens.
Okay, let's apply this policy and see.
vpol is the shortcut.
Okay, vpol, and it's ready. So now if I create a deployment Friday with image Nginx, it should fail. And yes, it failed because it is not having the env as a label. So there's no label with a key env, which is the policy over here. I can show that again. So has object, in this case, it's deployments, object dot metadata dot labels, and env. So env is not there in the object dot metadata dot labels for the resource for the deployment that we tried to create, which is why the validation failed. And since we said admission enabled true, it didn't let it allow to get created on the policy failure. Correct?
Yes.
Cool. So that's the validation admission policy which is happening. Now, this is also cluster wide, or how do we define cluster wide or non-cluster wide?
So currently, all new policy types are cluster-wide resources.
Okay.
You have the possibility with match conditions, which also applied or added as cell expressions to validate for a single namespace or a subset of namespaces. So you can describe which policies should be selected based on a cell expression.
Okay. All right. So what I'll do now is I'll create a virtual cluster as well and show what a vCluster is, and then let's try some policies inside the virtual cluster as well. So I already have vCluster installed, just in case you don't have vCluster, so you have to install that. So vCluster is a CLI that you can install from the GitHub repository, which is here, vCluster GitHub. That is the repository, and you can just install it. You can also go to the quick start and have the getting started and deploy, brew, install, or whatever you are system you are in. Or I think if you go to vcluster.com, that's the best way, and you can see install vcluster. It gives you the installation of the CLI as well. So different options that you can install vCluster from. So I already have vCluster. So it's just basically I'll create a vCluster, and the command is pretty simple. We'll do a vCluster.
Before you install it, do you
Yep.
might to remove the policy? I
Oh,
don't
yes.
know if it's creating a
Yes.
deployment, but it might interrupt your installation.
Yes. Good point. So just the delete, right?
Yeah.
All right. And vCluster create Friday. Friday. Ah. So it is starting to create a virtual Kubernetes cluster. And what it is doing is it is obviously creating one namespace since I haven't specified. So it creates a new one, vCluster Friday. Then it's doing a Helm upgrade and installing that. And internally, what it is doing is it is creating a stateful set. That stateful set will be acting as the control plane of the Kubernetes cluster. So, and that's the model that we say, like instead of cluster per tenant, you go to a route of control plane per tenant. So every virtual cluster comes with its own control plane, and we'll be able to see kubectl get pods -a. We'll be able to see something in initializing phase. Yeah. So that's the pod that is getting created on the host cluster. So this is how it appears to the administrator of the host Kubernetes cluster. And what you distribute to your teams is only the kubeconfig files that are generated for the virtual cluster. It'll automatically create a new context, and you can see it is running. And soon the kubectl get pods -a will turn to a different thing. So it should be, yes, it switched the namespaces. Yes, so now if I do a kubectl get pods -a, I don't see anything. So why? Because it created a new Kubernetes context with the user, with the permissions, with the what all stuff it is visible, security isolations and stuff like that. And this is the kube config. I give it to the team. And now if I do kubectl get pods -a, I only see the networking, the code DNS pod, which is running. I don't see anything from the host cluster. That's the whole purpose. For me, who is now accessing the vCluster, the virtual Kubernetes cluster, it's a CNCF certified, conformance tested virtual cluster, which is there. And I'm able to do whatever I want. Like I can actually install Kyverno here again. I can do all sorts of things. So right now, since we haven't synced anything, so stuff won't work, but the cluster-wide stuff would be respected. We'll try that as well. Uh, but I'm inside the virtual cluster now, and kubectl run nginx hyphen image nginx. It's simple, the pod that is getting created, kubectl get pods. Now, interestingly, all these commands, all these requests go to the API server of the control plane of the virtual cluster. So your host cluster API server is not overloaded. And there is a component of syncer, which I can actually show you. So vCluster docs. So that's the architecture. So it has its own control plane, and there's a syncer process which is there. So you, as a user, do not talk to anything on the host cluster. You talk directly via kubectl to the control plane of the virtual cluster. And then whatever you create over here, it gets mapped and synced to the host cluster. And then the host cluster components are used, the regular scheduler, the regular stuff. But yes, with vCluster latest release, you can have your custom schedulers the um, inside the virtual Kubernetes cluster as well, and you can use that, which is the hybrid scheduling mode. So that's something which latest got released yesterday. There will be a webinar on completely on those how to use all these stuff, the new features, which we are not trying. What we are trying is the Kyverno policies. So there are two things. One, we can definitely test out the host cluster policy that was there. So kubectl config get context, and let's go to the host cluster, kubectl config use context, kubectl get pods -a. I want to show you how the nginx pod that I created on the virtual cluster looks on the host cluster. So this was the namespace. There is this pod that we don't see as part of the virtual cluster. This pod we see as part of the virtual cluster, and this is what we created. So we created nginx. The syncer added the X and default as the namespace and X Friday as well in syncing it onto the host cluster, so that if Courtney or Frank also creates virtual cluster and they try to create same namespaces and they don't interfere. So it add automatically the vCluster, all that components. That's how it gets synced, and everyone can have their own set of things. So now I'm in the host cluster, and I can apply that policy again, which is the cluster wide policy. So kubectl apply -f policy 1. And let's switch back to the vCluster context. Config use context and kubectl create deploy demo -image equal to nginx. Let's see if the clusteroid policies are respected. Okay, it has created this, but ideally it should have said not to create this because it doesn't have that particular label. Not sure why that would have happened, because in the end it is a cluster-wide policy, and the admission has to go through uh, the admission controller over there. I don't know if the policy was effect immediately. We can actually use the previous context and try to create a deployment. Okay, here it is failing, but on the virtual cluster, it is getting created. So that's the new. Yeah, go ahead, Fran.
But I think you mentioned that it has its own API server and also its own webhooks, I think. So will it go through the webhook configuration of the host
Actually,
API server?
I did try this one, which is Kyverno.
So I as I tested it today, I think it's not working for all kind of resources. So when you go with the node pod example you had last time,
It
it
worked,
works
yes.
because
Yes.
it's using the same network and also the same network components in some way, but deployments are not synced to the host, correct?
But the request goes to the control plane. Like when I create the service inside the virtual cluster, it has to get created from the host cluster. Like um, the host cluster needs to create it. So validation should fail over there. But that is interesting why this particular thing would not work, because in the end it creates and then it syncs. Like it's the scheduler that schedules, and then
But the scheduler schedules a pod, not the deployment. Or does
yes,
it?
you're right. Yes, you're right. Maybe a pod. Is there a pod validation policy which is there that we can try? Then I
So
think.
you can just rewrite the existing one for pod level, I would say.
Oh, okay. Yes, let's do that.
But you
So
can,
that would be interesting. Yes. So VI policy. It
so
is
the API group
default
needs to be,
pods. Uh, Rest everything
that's
is
it.
fine, right?
Yeah.
Cube serial delete -f policy. Cube serial run nginx -image. Yeah, so the pod is failing. That is correct. Now let's go back to the vCluster context. So the pod also got created. Cube serial get pods. But which is good, it didn't get created. So it got created in the API server from the virtual cluster, but eventually it didn't get created. It failed for the denied request, check pod labels. So the syncer tried, but it got rejected by the validation policy. Okay, so that part is working. And then if I want, maybe let's try installing it on the virtual cluster itself, where we are. Okay, documentation, installation methods, helm install. I am in the right context. Let me just check. Yes, I'm in the right context. Okay. Oh, okay. Oh, the pod policy has to be removed. Okay. So switch the context to all right. Let's get back to the vCluster context, and I hope it starts now. delete pods. Okay, so we have the admission controller, which is starting. Test all pods are in running state. Probes check happening. Okay, so we have everything which is up and running, and this is inside the um, virtual cluster. So this is inside the vCluster that we have installed. So that is one part. Let me first create the policy kubectl create -f policy1. So now the policy I have created is inside the virtual cluster. Kubectl run Friday -mh nginx. Yes. So now this is very interesting. Why is because usually in multi-tenancy, one of the biggest problem is how do you have different custom resources for your clusters, because CRDs are cluster-wide object. Since virtual cluster has its own control plane, that gives you the flexibility that you can have your own version. So maybe I want a lower version or a cutting-edge version of Kyverno installed. I can do that, as we have seen. My host cluster is already having the Kyverno installation of a specific version. I can have a specific version of installation of Kyverno on the virtual cluster. And now you can see, although the cluster policy was respected by the syncer, so if there is a policy on the host as well, which is cluster wide. Oh, okay, that's the balloons which are coming. So the reactions are going through the camp. So,
Just celebrating.
and celebrating, right? It worked. So yeah,
Okay.
it's the celebration. So if there are the policies which are there on the host, that will be respected either by the syncer. So you might see the pod which has started to come up, but it will fail at the syncing level. Or you can have just like this, where it is not even admitted. So after when it goes to the API server, it does the 3 A's: authentication, authorization, and admission. And as soon as it goes to the final step of admission, it fails over there, because that is where the validation check is kind of happening. Cool. Cool. We have a couple of more minutes. Can we try a mutating policy? Like, what is the simplest one?
The mutating policy type is not implemented in the current stable version.
Okay.
It comes in a new one. You could try a mutate as a cluster policy.
Yeah.
But maybe before that, also a use case still for validation. So we have started to rewrite our pod security standards in Cell. When you show in our chat, I send it a kubectl apply command. When you apply this in the host,
Should I apply this on the host or virtual cluster, or it doesn't matter?
on the host.
Okay. Config. This is the Friday one. This is the host. Yeah.
And when you check for the policy reports in your vCluster namespace, you will see that it's now also validating the synchronized pods from your vCluster in your host cluster, which means that you can check the compliance of the vCluster components from the host cluster, so from a central one.
What should I do now? I didn't get that.
kubectl get poll L. Write it. Here. Or get policy reports. This is
Okay.
short
Okay.
version.
So
So these are the
All these
reporting.
got created.
Yes, so you get reports from your host components as normal, but you get also the reports from the synchronized pod resources of your virtual cluster, which means that you see or that you can also apply compliance resources on the host cluster and still validating synchronized vCluster resources with it.
Can pass.
Um,
What does it mean? Like this one, this policy. What does when I do this? What it exactly means?
so you have your engines resource from the vCluster,
Yep.
and it basically passes all 10 validating policies which are applied in background mode. So when you
Oh,
do a get kubectl get vpol, then you will see that it installs, I think, 6 validating policies or, or 10. So these
yeah.
are basically rewrites of the old PSA. Um, and yeah, Kyverno did a rewrite as cluster policies, and now we also have a version for the new validating policies. So as we want to move all our existing policies into this new policy types in the near future, and yeah, you can use them to validate from your host cluster, your host components, as well as the virtual components.
Nice. So this gives me the flexibility as a Kubernetes administrator to even put some security guardrails on the virtual clusters and check the reportings and stuff.
So you apply your compliance checks on your host cluster and validating your virtual clusters as well. Yes.
Nice. That's fancy. All right, we are about time, and I'll stop sharing my screen so that we all are back. Um, so if someone is starting out today with Kyverno, and what do you suggest? They start out with the new Kyverno playground because that is where the new policy types are in, which is where we are moving towards, and don't use or study about the old policies, right?
I would say yes. Frank, I don't know, you might have a different opinion. I think for most people, if you've already been using Kyverno, you go at some point probably going to want to play with the playground to think about migrating to newer policy types. But if you're just getting started, starting off the playground is great because it's quite intuitive. It's very self-explanatory in a lot of ways. And because our new policy types are there, you'll be getting started with the latest version of what we're doing, which then you don't have anything to migrate later on. Also, I think it's super beginner friendly. The fact that YAML is quite beginner friendly, but Cell even more so. It's a very, very straightforward way of communicating what it is that you want to get done. And so I think it's for people who are just getting started, that's the whole idea, is to make it as easy as possible. That's probably the best place to start off with new policy types and Cell.
Nice. And if someone has to join like community Slack and stuff, where do they kind of join?
Absolutely. So Kyverno.io is our main website right now. We've got our Kyverno repo. There's a lot of information there as well. We have community calls as well as maintainer calls every single week. Those happen on Tuesday and Wednesday at 4:30 p.m. CET. So those are open, public, and everyone's welcome to come. We do have a lot of new contributors that show up specifically to our community call. If you're interested in contributing, we always have good first new issues marked in our repo. But also, if you've contributed something and you want to review, you can show up to our community call. We have very, very generous maintainers who show up and walk people through their review process to get their contributions reviewed and added into the repo. And then also we've got some really exciting things coming up where you can connect with other people in the Kyverno community. We've got KyvernoCon North America. The CFP closes for that on Monday. CFP closes for all co-located events for KubeCon Atlanta on Monday, but specifically KyvernoCon, that's my favorite. Please do consider submitting, especially if you've done a quick use case or are just getting started with vCluster and Kyverno together and you get it up and running. It's a very welcome event for first-time speakers. So CFP is open for that until Monday. And then later next week, we have a CFP that opens for a virtual KyvernoCon event hosted with CNCF also, because we have such a large global community and we understand that not everybody can make it to our in-person event. So we are doing an extra event to welcome our global community as well. So that's also a great place to connect with our maintainers, with other people in our community, and with end users as well.
Awesome. There's one question, if Frank or Courtney, you can take. And also, meanwhile, Courtney, can you send me the link for KyvernoCon so that I can send that to the chat? So Frank, do you want to take this one? Like, let's say I want to learn network policy in K8s. Kyverno would be a good option to start with as a beginner in network policy part.
So there is not really yet a relation to network policies and Kyverno. So I think network policies are a bit different. So they control which components are able to speak to each other. So you can allow ingress or ingress traffic. This is nothing which goes through an admission request or the API server or something. So I think for network policies, the Kubernetes documentation is a better fit.
Yep, and also there is a Cilium network policy playground. Let me just find the link for that, which is pretty fancy. Yes. I'll just share the link to that. It's the right starting point to kind of learn about network policies and try different policies. And for the Slack channels, I think Kyverno Slack is there on both CNCF and K8s as well, right? Or it's CNCF only?
Absolutely. We're on CNCF Slack, Kubernetes Slack also.
Okay.
We're on social media. There is a Kyverno user group also on LinkedIn. So there's always people who are sharing content that they've created or use cases or questions in that group as well.
Awesome. So what I'll do is for this episode, I'll create a repository in general, and I'll put all the we'll put all the vCluster Fridays over there with episode 1. I'll add the documentation that I showed you, the doc, and also the policies that we created, the commands that was used in this particular stream, so that you can also go try out yourself. And if you have any questions, feel free to comment on the stream. Make sure to join vCluster Friday every Friday. Hopefully we are able to do it every Friday. And then join the vCluster Slack as well. vCluster.com has all the information of joining the vCluster Slack, so you can join that too. And there's one last thing from Luffy. Sorry, so Kyverno controls the admission control permissions, basically control the flow of admission controller. Yes, so that's the admission controller. Kyverno sits in that particular space. And thank you so much, Frank and Courtney, for joining in for the first vCluster Fridays and enlightening us about Kyverno deep dive.
Yeah, thank you for having us. This is very last minute, very exciting. And I think, Frank, you do a fantastic job of explaining this. So thank you for coming along.
Absolutely.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for the invite.
Thank you all. And see you next week. Bye.